So Jane and I went away last weekend. I almost want to say my name's Brandt. I actually do work here. I actually spend time here. And we went north for one last time to see some family and friends. And so you get like a little travel log. So if I bore you, I'm going to wait for that sound of sneering referenced in Acts. So we went up north, and Jane and I visited my youngest son, Zachary. Zachary turned 38 years old on May 20th. He's the youngest of three, 38, 40, and 42. And the gem of the visit, although I love my son, was our granddaughter, Renee. We traveled to Lititz, Pennsylvania. Have you been to Lititz, Pennsylvania? General Sutter Inn, Wilbur's Chocolate Factory. Okay. We spent time with Renee, his daughter. She's a beautiful 4-year-old and very articulate. In fact, for the Merediths and the Milsoms, we went to an English pub for dinner. There in Lititz, Pennsylvania, the heart of Dutch country, an English pub. So Renee buddies up with Jane, and Renee calls themselves fancy. She and Jane are fancy. I'm fat, but she's fancy. So we visited, we had dinner, and then we went out for ice cream. Not yet, go back to that one, we're not there yet. So the next evening, Jane's brother and his wife invited Jane and I for dinner. And we were guests on the USS New Jersey, moored in Camden, New Jersey. Okay. He's a member of the Churchill Society. And at the dinner, all attendees could buy a raffle ticket for $10, with the winning ticket being able to press a button and fire the big guns on the USS New Jersey. And I was too cheap to spend $10 to press a button. But when the button was pushed and the guns went off, I don't know if it's just, they were just aimed towards Philadelphia for whatever reason from New Jersey. The ship shook. I think we have the clip there.
2, 1. God bless the United States of America.
Now, the best part about that shot was I was taking the video, and there was a person who stood in front of me. I moved to the right, and the person moved to the right. I moved to the left, and the person moved to the left. That was gold to get that shot. But after the guns fired, a person standing next to me said, "Did you feel it?" Yeah. I felt the ship shake. I felt the vibration of the guns. I just wonder if the folks who gathered for this Jewish festival felt the wind of the Spirit as it blew around the room, saw the tongues of fire falling from the sky. I mean, if someone would come home from worship on a Sunday morning and share that vision with the family who may not worship, about tongues of fire, people speaking in different languages, this rush of a violent wind, wouldn't you think they were on some kind of ecclesiastical cannabis therapy that they're taking part in? I thought that was witty. I thought it was really good. Back in 2011, Jane and I lived in Arlington, Virginia. And if you remember, an earthquake hit Washington, D.C. Okay? Northern Virginia and even parts of the Northeast. It's about a minute 45 clip. But here's how ABC News' David Muir reported the event.
We had just arrived on the Amtrak train when suddenly the train station began to rumble like we hadn't felt or seen before. Millions of Americans feeling and fearing the same thing at that moment, obviously with the 10th anniversary of 9/11 approaching. And this morning here, we're getting a clearer picture of the damage that cracked at the top of the Washington Monument. The estimated 5.8 quake drove thousands from office buildings and train stations, even damaged national treasures, creating that crack in the Washington Monument's capstone. Near the epicenter in Mineral, Virginia, supermarket surveillance video captured the moment. The White House shook. And at the National Cathedral in Washington, damage to 3 of the 4 pinnacles atop the tower. The quake interrupts this commercial being taped in Virginia.
Just thought we'd take this opportunity to show you our new customer waiting room. Hey, you feel that?
And in New York, as the DA was holding a press conference, you could see it in his face.
Oh, no, okay. I've been through earthquakes in Seattle.
His colleagues racing to leave the platform. 911 operators were overwhelmed by frightened callers.
I need you to calm down for me, okay? Okay, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
We were on board an Amtrak train to D.C. when suddenly Union Station, the train station, started shaking violently. Officers yelling to us and to passengers to get out. So many workers from Washington to New York had that same feeling in their gut, just weeks now before this country marks 10 years since 9/11.
The ground started shaking and people started screaming and running around.
It's scary when you're all the way up there, you know, on the 14th floor. It's not easy.
The most powerful East Coast earthquake in nearly 7 decades left its mark. Back at the damaged Washington Monument, the Cross family was at the top. They say they felt the monument sway nearly a foot.
There's a lot of chaos, a lot of people yelling, some screaming.
They said they felt pieces of the monument falling on them. And most interesting, the lemurs at the National Zoo began alarm calling a full 15 minutes before the quake hit. Sounding the alarm, in fact. Here in Washington this morning, some of the public schools are closed and some of the national monuments as well for inspection. So if you're here traveling with your family, do call ahead. Robin, I got to tell you, deep in that Union Station, the train station down below, when it started to rumble and people were yelling terror, bomb, and screaming, a real sense of just how frightening this was for so many Americans for a time. And I've got to tell you how many people came up to me and said they were relieved this was just an earthquake. Have you heard that before?
Rarely do you hear that. A lot of rattled nerves. Okay, David, thank you.
The building I worked in, we evacuated. Jane called. The chandelier was swaying back and forth in the dining room. But when the unexpected happens, our simple, predictable, and familiar lives are shaken. During the Jewish wheat harvest known as Pentecost, people didn't expect the sound like the rush of a violent wind. No one expected divided tongues as a fire to appear with a tongue resting on each of them. No one expected people to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. No, we like predictability. We embrace familiarity. We like things decently and in order. Stay on script. Color within the lines. Just be normal. This story possesses remnants of Moses going up on the mountain, the construction of the Tower of Babel, the prophecies of Joel that are really quoted at the end of chapter 2 of Acts. As Luke writes, all were amazed and perplexed, saying, what does this mean? Others sneered and said they're filled with new wine. Remember Otis from the Andy Griffin Show? Okay, the town drunk? I thought you'd like that one. Oh, just a couple you did. That's okay. People speaking different languages. A crowd gathered for one event, and something new happens. And out of it comes Peter, who preaches his first sermon. His talking points are simple. These men are not drunk, and he quotes the prophet Joel. The Holy Spirit shakes up the status quo. There's a harvest taking place in this festival, and the harvest is that of people for the cause of Christ. When God's Spirit is poured on all flesh, sons and daughters shall prophesy. Young men shall see visions, and old men shall dream dreams. We're not done dreaming yet, no matter how old we are. This passage catches the words of Joseph's brothers. Remember the story back in Genesis? He had that Technicolor dream coat, the coat of many colors. You know, he's wearing that. He's making enemies with his brothers because he's having these dreams where he is the one, the center of attention. And in an effort to silence him, they plot to leave him for dead. And they said this before springing the trap. Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into the pits. We can say that if vicious animals devoured him, we shall see what becomes of his dreams. Dreams have a way of upsetting the status quo, shaking the predictable nature of life, changing our outlook. That's what the Holy Spirit does. That's what happened in Pentecost. Dreamers sometimes have little chance of seeing their dreams come to fruition, since most dreams Most dreams are threatened. New development? Not in my backyard. You know what they do in Lancaster County when they clear a forest to put a development in? They name the streets after the trees they took down. Popper Street, Oak Street, that's what they do. Rehab center? Not in my backyard. Affordable housing? Not here. Harvest was such a huge season when I grew up as a kid. My grandfather owned this Huber steam engine. And when I was a kid, 10 years old, we'd go to these freshman reunions. And so you have these traction engines, there were Hubers, there were Fricks, there were Peerless, all this stuff. That one there is a 1922 Huber steam engine, reverse flue boiler with the smokestack in the back. The last one made in Marion, Ohio. Okay? And when my grandfather died, my grandmother, at the urging of the Smithsonian, donated to the Smithsonian, where it stood for about 20 years in the National History Museum. And then now it's packed away next to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Who's the guy? Indiana Jones. I lost it there. But anyways, it's packed in a warehouse somewhere.